It is said that before Plato became a philosopher, he wanted to become a great tragedian and win the first prize at the annual festival of Dionysia. And it all changed the day he met Socrates. He went back that evening and burnt all his drafts, all his tragedies, because he had met the man he was going to devote the rest of his life to. Over the course of his life, Plato wrote about 35 dialogues, and they can be classified into three different stages: early, middle, and late dialogues. Each of these stages have a specific theme or quality to it. In this video, I'm not going to go into specific details, key ideas, or analysis of each dialogues, but my intention is just to give you a flavor of what Platonic dialogues are about. I'll give you a brief intro to prominent dialogues in each stages and show you how the dialogues changed and evolved through the course of Plato's life as he grew older. Consider this as an overview of the Platonic corpus. Phase 1. The Early Dialogues. Plato's canonical works began at 399 BC after the death of Socrates. He would be 28 years of age at this time. I've divided Phase 1 into two categories of dialogues: the Socrates Defense Trilogy and the Search of Essence series. The trilogy contains three dialogues: Apology, Credo, and Phaedo, and they all revolve around the final moments of Socrates' life. The Apology is Socrates' famous defense speech at his trial. Socrates is charged with corrupting the youths and abandoning the gods in the city of Athens. The Credo is a conversation between Socrates and his friend Credo while Socrates was in prison, debating about whether he should escape. The Phaedo is the final moments before Socrates drinks the hemlock, where Socrates argues about the immortality of the soul. If you've never read Plato, the trilogy is a really good place to start. The Search of Essence series, on the other hand, are a short series of dialogues where the conversations is usually revolve around just one key idea or definition. These are not full-fledged dialogues where Plato lays out his definitive theories, but he begins to introduce the idea of essence in these dialogues. He contemplates deeply about just a single word like courage, friendship, beauty, speculating what does it really mean. The pattern in his dialogues are usually always the same. Socrates goes to an expert, asks them a simple question, again usually a definition. The expert gives a confident answer. Socrates keeps questioning and analyzing their answer, and in the end he exposes their ignorance. But Socrates himself does not offer an outright answer either, so the conversation often ends in a state of confusion, or in Greek, aporia. The title of these dialogues and most of Plato's dialogues are named after the person Socrates is speaking to. In the Euthyphro, Socrates approaches a priest and asks him what is piety or holy. This is also the dialogue where we encounter the famous question Socrates asks: is what is holy loved by the gods because it is holy, or is it holy because it is loved by the gods, which later became known as the Euthyphro dilemma. Likewise, in Laches, he turns to two army generals to examine the nature of courage. In Parmenides, he speaks with a young handsome boy about the temperance or moderation. In Lysis, he questions two boys about the essence of friendship. In Hippias Major, he challenges a sophist to clarify the essence of beauty. In Hippias Minor, he questions the same sophist about the nature of lying and truth. And in Ion, he talks to a rhapsode, an interpreter of Homer, about the sources of art and inspiration. Consider these early dialogues as, if you'd like, an appetizer to Platonic dialogues. Plato or Socrates doesn't establish any foundational ideas like the allegory of the cave or the theory of the forms. The purpose of these dialogues is merely to expose the ignorance of the supposed experts. I'll quote a line from the Apology which perfectly captures the essence of these early dialogues. I am wiser than this man. It is likely that neither of us knows anything worthwhile. But he thinks he knows something when he does not, whereas when I do not know, neither do I think I know. So I'm likely to be wiser than he to this small extent, that I do not think I know what I do not know. Phase 2. The Middle Dialogues. The Middle Dialogues are the strongest works of Plato. This is where Plato is in his intellectual prime, where he lays down his major theories. I've divided Phase 2 in three categories: Plato versus Sophists, Love and Beauty, and Plato's Magnum Opus, The Republic. In the first category, Plato takes on a bunch of Sophists. The Sophists were professional teachers and public speakers in ancient Greece, who, unlike Socrates, charged money for their teachings. They specialized on rhetoric and persuasion, and their main priorities were achieving influence and power rather than seeking truth. There are three dialogues in this category. Meno is about the philosophical inquiry that begins with the question of whether virtue can be taught, but it shifts into the nature of knowledge itself later on. This dialogue is also where Plato establishes his theory of recollection, the idea that learning is not acquiring new information, but remembering the eternal truths the soul already knows. I want to mention that Meno is not exactly a sophist, but he's a student of a famous sophist Gorgias, but I have included this in this category for the purposes of organization. Protagoras is another lively debate between Socrates and the famed sophist Protagoras about the same question of whether virtue can be taught. It expands further into the question of whether virtues like justice, piety, courage, temperance, and wisdom are separate or really one and the same. Gorgias centers around the confrontation between Socrates and three sophists, Gorgias, Polus, and Callicles. It is a conversation about the nature and the value of rhetoric. Socrates questions whether being persuasive and being powerful, or in today's world being commercially successful, really makes a good life. He argues that justice, self-control, and the health of the soul matters more than wealth, influence, or pleasure. A lot of people also consider Gorgias as the first dialogue to read, since it lays out Plato's sharpest critique against rhetoric and power and clearly sets Socrates against the sophist. In the second category, love and beauty, we have the Symposium and the Phaedrus. Symposium is one of the most famous Platonic dialogues which explores several different perspectives on love through a series of speeches given by the Athenians, with Socrates concluding that love is like a ladder leading from physical attraction to the contemplation of true eternal beauty. Phaedrus combines reflection on love, the soul, and rhetoric. Phaedrus is also one of the characters that gives a speech in the Symposium. In this dialogue, Socrates argues that true persuasion comes from understanding the soul and seeking the truth, not just clever speech. The dialogue also explores love as a divine force that can elevate the soul, showing how passion, reason, and self-knowledge work together to achieve wisdom and a meaningful life. And in the final category, we have Plato's Magnum Opus, the Republic. This dialogue is Plato's most comprehensive work, where he lays out his vision of justice, the ideal state, and the philosopher king. But the Republic is not just a political treatise. It also maps out Plato's metaphysics and epistemology, introducing major Platonic ideas like the allegory of the cave, the divided line, and the theory of forms. It is also a meditation on ethics and development of an individual, including concepts like the tripartite soul. Overall, Republic is one of the most important works in all of philosophy. Phase 3. The Late Dialogues. In his later years, Plato begins to grow more skeptical of some of his own earlier ideas, and he begins questioning it and refining it. These dialogues feel more technical, more critical, and some would say it's more practical and grounded than his middle works, which were more of an ideals. Socrates often takes a smaller role, while new characters and larger, more complex arguments take the center stage. Parmenides is Plato's most self-critical work. Here he puts down his own theory of forms under heavy criticism. Instead of defending the forms, he shows all the problems with the idea, and in the end, Parmenides defeats Socrates. It is a difficult reading, but it shows that Plato was willing to question even his own ideas. Timaeus is the most famous of the late works, and the most influential. This dialogue is about Plato's contemplation of how the universe was created. He introduces the figure of a demiurge, a divine craftsman who organizes the cosmos according to mathematics and harmony. It had a huge influence on later Christian thinkers like St. Augustine of Hippo and Clement of Alexandria. The Laws is Plato's longest and last major work. Unlike the Republic, which is more of a philosophical dream, the Laws is more of a practical take on running a real city. Plato lays out rules for education, religion, crime, and politics. He begins to emphasize more on concrete guidance over his earlier abstract theories. So, over the course of his life, Plato's dialogues move from short, questioning, almost line-by-line conversations in the early phases to bold theories and big ideas in the middle phases, and finally to a critical and practical reflection in his later years. Together, these works give us not only the voice of Socrates, but also the growth of Plato's own mind as he wrestled with the question of truth, justice, love, knowledge, and the nature of reality itself. To this day, Plato remains one of the most important figures in the history of Western philosophy. As Ralph Waldo Emerson once said, Plato is philosophy and philosophy is Plato. Thank you for watching.